Hey guys, it's from QC with GameDev, and for this video I just want to talk about arguably the most important part of making new projects both in and out of GameDev, the planning. So I know for me, I definitely perform a lot better when I have concrete objectives I understand and I'm working towards, and it really helps just psychologically for me to be checking things off on a to-do list every day. It gives me a sense of progression, feels good. So I believe in game dev, you really need to define your objectives clearly ahead of time, and you need to define what your end state is going to look like. So what's your project going to look like at the point where you're going to be okay walking away from it? I think that it really helps to define that, because when is a game finished? There's not really a fixed definition of that. So you have to make that for yourself, right? So I really wanted to clearly define what I wanted to achieve, what I wanted the game to play like, and exactly what should happen in the game. So I'm familiar with Unity, so I decided to make my game in Unity, stick with what I know, because it's one less thing to worry about, right? So I really like board games. So I decided I wanted to try and recreate one of my favorite board games, Karak. So the flow of the game is really super simple. It basically already plays like a video game. So my goal was really to recreate that existing board game, make it into a game, and just get that experience of making those systems, making them work. Maybe someday adding like a sort of online multiplayer mode, but at least right now for the moment, integrating a local multiplayer in a kind of local couch experience. I thought it was really the simplest way to achieve that kind of board game vibe, which I do like a lot. So a big advantage, obviously, about just deciding to recreate an existing board game is that I really didn't have any questions to ask myself about, okay, so what are the rules of this game? How do things balance out? So that stuff already all exists, right? So all I had to do was really just know what the rules are and figure out how I wanted to represent that in the UI of my game. So I started making storyboards on Figma. It's a really great tool. You can use it for free. I really recommend it if you really just want to play with some ideas, get some visual cues, So my goal here was really to make clear what happens in the game, what do I want it to look like, right? So the first question I had to ask myself after choosing Unity as my game engine was, okay, so for which platform do I want to make this game, right? Because that's going to affect what my UI is going to look like, right? So I decided basically a laptop is fine, like a horizontal screen, that's fine, right? So I just picked a laptop. And another thing to take into account as you're choosing your platform is the input that you're going to get, right? So I was like, okay, I'm going to choose a computer, I'm going to have access to a keyboard, I'm just going to set those I'm just going to take that as true, right? So now I have an idea of what my basic screen is going to look like. I know what buttons I'm going to have, right? I'm not making an interface for a phone. I'm working with like a horizontal rectangle with potentially keyboard inputs. So I started just Googling some menus because I hadn't really made a UI before, and I wasn't really sure what flavor I wanted my UI to have. Like, I'm really not an artistic person, so it's like challenging for me to make that sort of thing. So I just looked up some images of menus basically, and I found some images I liked, and I kind of picked some elements out that I sort of jived with, and I created my own versions of them on Figma. And from there, I slowly started making like UI components. So I really just focused by making a main menu just to really get in the groove of making some UI elements. And from there, I was able to sort of define kind of a more consistent UI palette that I would be able to apply to the rest of the game as I developed new things. So the first thing I made was the main menu, and I added also a settings menu just to really to play with some UI things. So as I started defining actual game elements, right? So I knew in Karak, players take turns playing one at a time, and they have 4 actions per turn, right? So right away I knew I needed a way to show clearly whose turn it is, what's the round, who's currently playing, what's the action count, right? So I made UI elements for this. So next, knowing that each player's turn is made up of 4 actions, right? The first thing that comes to mind is like, okay, so each of these 4 actions, I need to let the player choose what they could be. So I made just a really simple little list of items, right? So one of the things the player can do, they can move. That's the basic thing every player can do, right? So the movement, they go from one tile to another, and we all start from the starting tile that has like 4 directions you can go in. So basically the flow is, as you go in a direction, an unknown direction, right, you explore a new tile. And the idea is, in the board game, you reach in, you pick out a tile, and then you can choose how you place down that tile. So I knew I needed some kind of tile placing mechanism, right? And the idea is, when you discover a new tile and you place it, the movement is important here, because it'll affect how you can move through that tile, how other players can access that tile, you know. So you have to take that into account. Also, when you discover a new tile, if it's a room, then you can discover something inside of that. There's some content that you can choose, that you can discover. It can either be an enemy or a treasure, right? So from there, I knew I needed a different UI element for a treasure, and I need a different UI element for an enemy. If it's a treasure, I need to be able to not open it if I don't have a key, because you need keys to open treasures. If it's an enemy, there's one character I know who has a skill that allows them to ignore enemies. So I had to take this into account when I made the initial enemy UI. Then given that you fight the enemy, what happens is, in the board game, you roll dice for damage. You have 2d6, right? So basically I made a UI for this as well, roll for damage. And basically after in combat, it sort of opens up a little bit, because there's many player abilities that come into account for the battle. So basically, for instance, there's one character who's able to reuse a certain type of magic scroll as many times as they want, or at least once per battle, without consuming it. I mean, there's another character who's able to re-roll ones, another character who can just re-roll their dice one time if they don't like it, the results of their die, you know. So there's many things I had to take into account here. So for me, it was super easy to get overwhelmed here. The name of the game was really just, okay, how can I identify actions that each of these player characters can take? How can I sort of try to plan for that? And how can I try to contain it to this flow? Or, you know, if it can't be contained, how do I extend it? But, you know, really, I tried not to get bogged down in the details here and really just focus on the UI. So given that I have, you know, character XYZ, what are their options? Let's just stick to that, okay? So from there, given that the player loses the battle, what happens is they lose 1 HP, they move back to their previous position, and that's the end of their round, right? But in the case where they win, what happens is that they actually get a reward from killing the enemy, and the reward is per enemy, right? And this is something that I didn't necessarily have to stick with for the computer game, but just to be consistent, I chose to stick with this formula. So basically, given that you kill the enemy, you get a reward. And in addition, there's one special enemy where when you kill them, you have the ability to curse another player. So that was another UI I had to make. And in addition, the end condition for the game is that the player kills the red dragon in Karak. So basically, given that a certain enemy is killed, I needed a game over screen, right? So that defines most of the functionality, right? Something else that occurred to me a little bit later was that when the player receives a reward, if they already have a full inventory, because the inventory space is actually limited in Karak, you can have 2 weapons, 3 spells, and 1 key, right? So for any of these things, if you're receiving this as a reward, I needed some kind of mechanism to be able to say, okay, either I don't want this, or I want to exchange something that I have already for this new thing that I have coming. So I had to make a UI to sort of be able to exchange given what I already had, right? So then coming back to the player's basic actions, I realized that I was missing a few important ones. So basically we have movement, but also we have, given that I'm on a node and there's, for instance, a dropped weapon on that node, I want to be able to pick up that weapon. I'm saying node, it's more of a tile. So given that I'm on that tile, I want to be able to pick up that dropped item, that weapon, that key, that spell, whatever it is, right? And if there's a treasure on that node, then I should be able to open it with a key that I have, and opening it should get rid of that key. Also, players, there's one spell they have where they're able to teleport another player to a healing font, right? So that's another option I had to add. And there's one character who has a skill, it's called swap. magical swap, something like this, right? So the idea is you're able to swap your position with another player. So that was literally an option I had to add to the main player sort of action menu specifically for that one skill, right? So that was something I had to take into account. So basically, after having defined these diagrams, I basically had an idea of what I wanted my UI to look like. From there, the name of the game was thinking about class diagrams and state machines. So I'll talk about this in the next video. Look forward to that, guys. I'll see you there.